Keep your head up, keep your head up, keep your head up. We'll make it through. We'll make it through. Keep your head up, don't let it drop. We'll make it through. And we'll make it through.
Hello to our viewing audience and to our audio audience as well. Welcome to Heads Up, a show about mental health and wellness. I'm retired school counselor Sue Mullen, and with me today is my co-host, Diane Vaccarello, licensed mental health and family therapist. Diane Vaccarello.
Sue Mullen.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
Great to see you.
I want to kind of clue our audience in a little bit to the fact that we are doing a 6-part series on wellness.
Yes.
And last week, I actually surprised you a bit.
You did.
Which was great because it sort of feeds into this idea that we like to plump down here in our living room and talk to each other about mental health and wellness.
Right.
Last week, you had no idea what was coming.
I really didn't. And you allowed me to pick a topic out of the 6 that you mentioned.
Yep.
And we did focus on that. I think I went around the circle with a few of them so that what we're planning on doing today is getting into number 2,
yes.
Topic, second topic.
Yep.
And are you picking this week?
I am.
Okay, great.
I am. We agreed that we were going to look at the 6 dimensions of wellness.
Yes.
And that this is the work of Dr. Bill Hetler, the co-founder of the National Wellness Institute out of Wisconsin.
Yes.
And last week, we started by talking about occupations and how your occupation can fit into your wellness or not, as the case may be.
Right.
And I think our intent is probably going to be to circle back to that as we come around after talking about this week's topic, which is, are you ready? Drum roll. Physical well-being.
Excellent.
All right.
Okay.
So let me give you what I got.
Okay.
So when we talk about physical well-being, what we're talking about is eating well, exercising regularly, and avoiding harmful habits by making responsible decisions. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. It
Yeah.
sounds great, but in practice, the reality is that it translates into all kinds of recommendations that people get from the American Medical Association, from the American Dietary Association.
Right.
Things like we should all be exercising 150 minutes a week. We should all be eating 5 fruits and vegetables a day.
Right.
We should not be drinking more than 1 or 2 alcoholic beverages. And we should avoid tobacco, stressful situations, whatever. There's a whole laundry list of things that we're supposed to do to be physically well. But my question to you, licensed family mental health counselor, how do we get people to do what they're supposed to do when they don't want to?
So, as a marriage and family therapist, I work with individuals, couples, and families. The interesting part of this is I get to see a person's own process of what they feel like is important or healthy for them. I also get to see what family members' opinions of what healthy looks like. Not everyone has the same, maybe in the same agreement. I think broadly we all probably feel like food and rest and all these things are really important for us. But why is it that it can be a struggle at times? I think mostly because life can get very busy. We can get off track from this idea of like structurally what we need in a given day. But I honestly think it has to do with the idea, one, humans aren't really great at being like told what to do. I feel like in general, it's better when we can like walk across the line versus be pushed or pulled in many ways, including physical health. So I think part of it is just tuning into what works for us. It's an individualized, customized kind of thing that we need to basically have feedback loops with our own body to see what feels good, what works. You know, the interesting thing with exercise is it doesn't feel good. It's like it really doesn't. Like it.
Oh, I have a lot to say about this. A lot.
I mean, it can hurt. You can be sore afterwards. So mentally, there's these almost like negative feedback loops saying, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" You have to get through the discomfort to come out the other side to feel some of the positive effects, like feeling stronger, feeling more flexible, maybe understanding that you can do things you couldn't do before. Those feedback loops come much later, and I think psychologically, it's hard sometimes when you're maybe stressed out and life is, you know, full of all sorts of things to feel that soon enough.
Listen, it all sounds easy. 150 minutes a week.
What is that? A little over 2 hours,
Breaks down, which breaks down to approximately 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. It sounds great.
Right.
I do not want to get out of that chair. I can think of 100 things that I could be doing with my time. And so I rationalize it, right? I have arthritis. It hurts for me to exercise. You know, where does the benefit and the risk, you know, where's the sweet spot between those two things?
Yeah.
How common is it for people to rationalize themselves out of the things that are very good for them?
Super common.
Okay.
So there's this term, well, it's referred to sometimes as like the rocket ship of thought. So you have like 5 seconds to make a decision and actually trust your decision or your comment to yourself. So if somebody's like sitting in their living room or something saying, I really should work out right now, or I really should do some stretching. Well, if they say that to themselves and 10 seconds later they're still not doing it, the chances of them actually getting up and doing it are much more reduced than it was before. So part of it is, if you're going to say that to yourself, maybe, you know, you could say, okay, I might not want to do this whole workout, but I'm going to do 5 minutes of it or 10 minutes of it, or I'm just going to show up on my mat and maybe do some stretching while I'm watching a show or something. You know, like it's moving it in some fashion. But once we do that, usually there's like a little bit of a momentum that gets built, you know?
5 fruits and vegetables. Do you eat 5 fruits and vegetables daily?
I literally had to get gas today in between some meetings that I was going to, and I stopped at a gas station and found the healthiest snack I could find in there was like a power bar kind of thing and some vitamin water, you know, but fruits and there were no fruits and vegetables there, and you know, part of it is planning ahead, it's being able to do all these things, but sometimes we just have to also make decisions, the best decisions we have in the moment or at the time. The pressure to do it perfectly all the time and to, you know, some people get down on themselves and say, I should be better at this, you know, adulting or whatever it is, you know. But honestly, we need to keep showing up and doing the best that we can in the moment. It doesn't mean it's perfect.
I have to laugh because I know I do it myself, that, you know, I convince myself that eating the peanuts is fine because peanuts are such a natural, wholesome, protein source. And let's face it, they're so much better than the cookies that I really want. That, you know, when somebody comes out and tells me that I should be eating a teaspoon of peanut butter,
it's a little depressing.
Well, it's
sometimes.
a challenge. It's kind of a challenge too.
It depends on how much you like peanut butter, right? But ultimately, that's part of it. Is it's a feel. We also just, if we step back and look at the big picture of this, it's about human brains are wired to feel good, and so this thing with exercise where it's like you can anticipate feeling sore, right? You have to do it so many times to not have the soreness anymore. But I was doing yoga the other day. It's one of the things that I feel like grounds me physically and mentally. And whatever yoga session I had, I was super sore the next day, more than I normally would be, which has a feedback loop that could be, well, you really did something. You worked a muscle group that you hadn't worked before, some micro muscles in there. But it also was sort of like, felt like a little bit like it threw me off on my momentum a little bit too, because I knew the next time was going to be I was going to feel that in a different way.
That much worse.
It's that much worse.
Right.
And so,
right.
you know, some of it, humans really go towards what feels good. Sometimes it's working out feels good. Even the hard parts of it feel good because you feel stronger, sort of mentally and physically. I do think there's an association, a connection with the stronger we are physically, we can also become stronger mentally and vice versa.
Oh, most definitely. And I find that it's the beginning of anything that is always the hardest.
Yes.
You know, after you've been exercising or eating well or getting those fruits and vegetables for 6 weeks, you're good to go because you're in a rhythm.
Yes, exactly.
It's the beginning of that cycle when everything feels like a sacrifice or, that you have to exert so much energy just to do the basic things. So on our list, Diane, we also have some, pretty obvious things like taking care of your good hygiene and making sure that you get good medical and dental care as part of your physical well-being, because I think that sometimes people like to ignore signs and symptoms that maybe there's something wrong with them either physically or particularly in their mouth.
Yes.
I know a ton of people that are afraid to go to the dentist.
Yeah, I think that avoidance piece again, or anticipation that it's going to be uncomfortable, that there's going to be discomfort there, and we have a tendency, I think, to sometimes avoid that, hope that, we can just squeeze through a little bit longer with that. I honestly think that, again, that your point about forming habits and forming structure, it does allow that to get easier. Something like dental work or like getting your teeth cleaned, what is it recommended every 6 months or so?
Yep.
There's a long gap in there. That's not a habit forming, right? When we're talking about a daily practice, it's an event. Exactly. It's not a habit. So we have to keep starting the ball again on something like that, going to the doctor or the dentist.
So I'm going to take you someplace, I don't know, maybe this will be slightly surprising, but in talking about habits and physical well-being, many of us have bad habits that impact our physical and mental well-being.
Right.
Some of them have to do with food. I mean, I'm thinking about friends that would describe themselves as being unable to live without sweets. Some of them have to do with compulsive behaviors. The opposite of me, who hates the 30 minutes a day of exercise, is the person that spends 3 hours a day in the gym.
Right. Right.
So talk to me a little bit about sort of the bad habits that can happen as a result of being overly concerned about physical well-being.
So there's a couple things that come to mind. One, you're asking about the overly physical, that type of habit. I'm thinking about the idea that sometimes people, certain habits can take on a life of their own, for example. And it's almost as though, who's in charge of this habit? Is the habit in charge of you, or are you in charge of the habit? So we have to encourage like a kind of flexibility that we test ourselves every now and again and say, can we do without even that exercise of 3 hours and do something different, so we can make sure we're fluid and that we're not just sort of like route in that sense. So that, then we're talking about interrupting patterns in a sense, but we have to understand what patterns, what's the purpose it's serving for us,
right? What
are we getting out of it that's like a negative feedback loop, and what are we getting that's positive for ourselves? So there are definitely bad habits. Even I'm thinking about bad habits that are like drinking alcohol, right? Where a person is, again, it's maybe sending a message to the brain, the emotion center part of the brain, where it says, this feels good. And so I just felt relaxed all of a sudden when I had this drink. So it's reinforcing itself to do that the next time you feel stressed out or nervous or just want to relax and enjoy yourself.
So are you talking about the person who comes home and has a glass of wine at the end of the day?
Yes.
universally, or are you talking about the person who doesn't know how to relax without having the glass of wine at the end of the day, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Because take the latter one of not knowing how to relax without a glass of wine, right? Or some substance, or so that is always important to test, like, can I do without that, or can I interrupt that? If there's this many drinks, can I do this many instead?
Yep.
You know, what happens if I do that? And gather information, try and get a sense for what happens. I'm also talking about somebody who, at the end of the day, because again, it's a habit, and so habits mean we tend to do them more longer term and regularly, even exercise as a habit, or certain food choices as a habit. So choice around a glass of wine can be, can I actually interrupt that habit, and what happens? You know, it's making sure that you have control over it versus it having control over you.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So it becomes more of sort of a faulty coping mechanism if it takes over you as opposed to you being in charge of it?
Yeah, and so I think that's just an internal test you want to do, just with a lot of things in life, just to make sure that you have sort of like the upper hand of that.
Yep.
I also think that with alcohol, oftentimes it's not a problem unless it's a problem. If it's interfering with something like your sleep patterns or your choices around food, some people might drink more and then not eat as much, or eat more depending on what they're drinking.
Yep.
It might interrupt a person's job or relationships or any of those things. You know, if it's interruptive, then it's officially a problem. If it's not, then is it a problem? I mean, how do you know if it's a problem?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you. How do you know if it's a problem?
And I think that's also about how you feel. Like, there's again that negative feedback loop that can happen. Might have felt really good until the next morning. Then you're not feeling great, and you're paying for that a little bit. You know, that's a negative feedback loop. And then you're saying, why did I do this again? You know what I mean? Why did I do that if it doesn't feel good?
So if we extrapolate from that and use sort of the same model when we're considering eating habits, then you would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, you would say, you know, if somebody is sneaking food out of the family candy jar, and it therefore means that a relationship is going to be affected by it, then, you know, it's one thing to eat the last Reese's peanut butter cup, but it's another thing if you know that it's your kid's favorite thing and they're going to be upset and you choose the Reese's peanut butter cup.
Right. What kind of disturbance is it causing?
Yeah. That delivers a different message.
Yeah, and it's important to keep an eye on those kinds of things and not be in sort of denial around, you know, what impact it has on yourself or other people.
Let me ask you about eating disorders. It's a big topic.
Yeah.
I can suspect that we may in fact do an entire segment on eating disorders at some point. Perhaps with an eating disorders expert with us.
Yes, that would be great.
But from you know, from that sort of family mental health and therapy point of view, what's the deal with an eating disorder and in terms of somebody's physical wellness?
So if I were to give an overarching 101 sort of view on it, eating, there are two things that we don't want to over-involve or interfere with when we're parenting and raising a child into an adult. And I will say that those two areas are potty training and food. We really don't want to force either of those things. That there's an
because bad things happen if you do.
Bad things happen if you do. You really, like, when a child is ready for potty training, they're ready for potty training. Of course, you can do reinforcement. There's nothing wrong with, we used to have like the potty train, I think. We would have like a whistle, you know, or something like that. But you don't want to force a child that's not ready, and you don't want to shame them or make them feel like they are not good enough because they're not moving along quick enough with it. Same with eating, reminding a person or talking to them about, are you you eating enough? Do you know, like getting over involved?
Yep.
As well as it ends up backfiring. It's a control issue is what it ends up being. And that child or that teenager, that young adult, they have ultimate control over eating. They have ultimate control over potty training. Do you know what I mean? Really. So, it can turn into a thing where there needs to be like a curtain of privacy and control. And so it's a backstage kind of thing that ends up happening oftentimes without somebody knowing, without the family members necessarily knowing in the beginning of as it's growing into, a problem. And again, because it can be habit forming, there's this, I was actually speaking with someone recently where they never really, they did actually get bullied for being overweight, things that people would say to them. So they felt like the control that they had was to remain thinner and to control that. And so that it has stayed with them for, many, many years. And so a lot of it is, there's Bedford Eating Disorder Clinic. There's all sorts of resources. There's, IOP programs, which are partial programs where people can really like have some intervention around interrupting those unhealthy patterns. And there's usually emotions and cognitions associated with food. And so it's really understanding and separating those out and understanding what's behind that. And really teaching the family system also how to support their loved one, because that's where they need the most support.
Even if their loved one is 4 and can speak in full sentences and is still not ready to be potty trained.
Generally speaking, a child does want to get there, and they have the ability. If there's this term called Enuresis or encapresis, that's where a child has a accident like number 1 or number 2, but it's sometimes symptomatic of something else going on for that child. I'm not talking about necessarily like a 4-year-old, although that could happen later on because of some trauma or some situation that's taken place, and still that reaction of sort of shame or like you need to change your bed and take care of those sheets because you did this, you know what I mean? Those are things that don't go so well. So there's a way of responding to that kind of thing.
And there are professionals that can help with all of these situations.
Unpacking that and figuring out how to handle that.
I've talked to many parents of 4-year-olds who don't know what to do.
Exactly.
And I've talked to many parents of 14-year-olds who, when food is the control vehicle, don't know what to do. But, as you mentioned, we have experts right within our own community that can not only sort of help unpack what the issues may be behind the control, but also help people develop a response that will support everybody.
Support health and growth and wellness in that area so that the eating disorder does not need to be a part of their life in that way.
So, Diane, would you agree, I'm going to put you on the spot here, would you agree that this concept of physical wellness has to do with balance and moderation? I mean, is that what we're looking at to figure out what works for each and every one of us in terms of where we give and where we take?
Yeah, it's not about being perfect with it. It's about being kind to yourself truly in all of these ways. When we eat healthier, more whole foods, the body truly will feel better in terms of its functioning and its capability. Our brain can think, differently at times. So then separating that out from like comfort foods and things like that, but give yourself comfort, give yourself some soothing, whatever that is, just not so much that it has these negative drawbacks where you are hooked on sugar or whatever the case may be, where you can enjoy it, but not be craving it so much that you get distracted. There's a difference.
Is the ultimate goal how you feel in terms of your own sense of wellness? Because I'm aware of the fact that at no point in time in this conversation have we talked about how you look.
Right, because this is one of those things where I think it's important when we're talking with family members, with friends even, it is important to sort of check in instead of like trying to be controlling around something, right? Or judgmental around appearance or whatever the case may be. You know, asking yourself and asking someone else that you care about, you know, is that working for them and how that makes them feel? You know, feelings are tough things. It's more like, is that working for you? And have people think about that on their own around what's working and what's not. Yeah, but internally, you know, it's asking that kind of question.
Right, and being able to accept the fact that what works for me may not work for you.
Absolutely.
You may be jumping up out of that chair so excited over that 30 minutes of exercise.
Exactly.
And I may be sitting in that chair thinking, I wonder what I'm going to make for dinner.
Yeah.
And both of those scenarios have a place and a worthwhile part in a family life.
Can even be self-care, both of those things in different ways, right? But it really has to do with being real and open with that, what is good for that person, for your own self, and trying to support that individualized, you know, recipe, no pun intended, but really it's, you know, even people with allergies, I find it so interesting when they might really love something that they're eating, but it doesn't make their body feel good, so they can let it go easier, or it's still a struggle, but their body is rejecting that. There's something really interesting at the psychological level of that, right? Where it's like,
oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Right.
I come from a family that has celiac disease.
Yes, exactly.
And so people ask me all the time, how can you live without deep dish pizza?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if deep dish pizza made you feel
exactly
like you were somehow or another shredding your colon, you probably would give up on the deep dish pizza.
And pick something different.
And pick something different because it's all about good choices. All right, I have totally and thoroughly enjoyed this conversation about physical wellness.
Yes, me too.
I am struck as I sit, last week we talked about occupations. This week we've talked about physical wellness. I can't decide which domain is most important to me yet.
You know what's important to me about both of those domains is that we support the idea of a person coming towards those decisions on their own with some support, but that, you know, we have to make our own choices with those things and the rewards and consequences that go with them.
Thank you for being here with me today.
My pleasure.
Thank you to our viewing and listening audience. We'll see you next week with episode number 4, 3. Which one are we on? 3.
Yes.
Episode number 3 in our wellness series, and you can find us on BCTV, on YouTube. Just look for a heads up. We're on demand and live if you're in our viewing area.
Exactly.
So
I think it's number 4 actually, number 4 of season 2.
Okay. Well, goes to show you, we're fluid.
We are.
All right.
We're flying.
I'll see you next week.
All right. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Gotta keep your head